Welcome. Today we're going to talk about shade landscaping for your garden. Now, I've talked about this somewhat in the low maintenance design work that we did. And if you don't remember what I talked about then, I'm going to put a link below so you can go back and start looking at that first phase of your landscape planning. Where I want to start is with the sun. And during different times of year, I think most people know your sun is going to come in at different angles. And depending on where that happens for you is going to depend on where you are on the earth, right? If you're closer to the equator, maybe you're not going to have as much of a split. But if you're up kind of where I am in Phoenix, Arizona, then you know in the wintertime, the sun is coming in really, really low. And in the summertime, it's really, really high. I think it's like 81 degrees. So you want to be able to plan your shade to protect all the things that you need protected to help you with cooling and yet not block out the sun when you need it for warming. So let's take a look at what that looks like. First of all, you have to get to know what the degrees are the best you can, and you can do this. You might already know, if you've lived where you're at for a year or more, you've probably noticed, okay, it's hotter at this time of the day. It's, in the wintertime, it feels great when the sun is coming through these particular windows. And you might not know that you can actually design like a patio cover that will help block out most of that sun that's coming in during noon on your summer days when you don't want it, but you can still allow for the sun to come in on the winter times, and that actually helps warm it. So either way, it's energy saving, it's time saving. Let's talk where you want to put it. Now, a tree will generally provide shade for 1.5 times its height. And so what you want to do is be able to calculate, okay, these are the trees I want. They get to, let's say, 20 feet. Then you need to plan for at least 30 feet. That's 20 times 1.5, and where that shade is going to land. Now, you might already have trees in your yard that you want to figure out, do I keep them? Do I not keep them? Is there something I can do? So I want to talk through 2 sites that I was at this last week. Actually, there's 3 that had different shade problems and how we can go about fixing them, and hopefully that will help you. So the first one, they had, I believe it was a total of 5 trees. One of them was dead. One of the trees we were going to have to, either we could pull it out or it was going to go down on its own at some point. And I've seen those trees in my neighborhood. They just die standing, and then eventually it goes down a limb at a time. And I wish I remembered what type of tree it was, but I don't. So anyways, instead of pulling that tree down right away, we planted more trees in between because there was a wide stretch where there was just sun hitting the building and nothing to shade it whatsoever. So that we needed more trees there. And then we also needed to make sure that those trees could be receiving water where it could, and it wouldn't be fully dependent on landscape watering. We made sure that we had basins that we created that would help with erosion, but also help in capturing this water for the trees that we wanted to plant. And the trees also served the purpose of absorbing the water, right? Because the roots go down into the soil and make little tunnels basically for the water to be able to infiltrate. So that's great all the way around, right? So if you're having a flooding problem, you need more of that. And if you are having a shade problem where you need more shade, then you've got both, right? You've got the vertical help going both ways. So that was site 1. Site 2 was a different story. They had great tree coverage all the way around, but the problem was they had a tree in the front, which is a eucalyptus tree. And just to be clear, I love eucalyptus trees, but I have noticed problems with them over the years. First of all, they drop limbs when they're going or when they're struggling or stressed. They can drop a whole limb and take out whatever is in the way. People, property, you name it. And that's not good. And then they usually have a really large root area and they love water. So one of the situations I saw them in was in Israel along the Jordan River. They had some problems with some swampy areas and they planted a ton of eucalyptus trees, which was great to absorb all that water. I've also seen this done with fig trees. They'll plant tons of fig and it helps absorb all that water, but then you end up with these kind of water hogs that propagate really easily. They can multiply themselves without any help, and then you have a whole bunch of them and you've got a different problem. So be careful when you're picking out your trees. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, the owners were really in love with this tree. They didn't want to get rid of it, but they were disappointed with the two trees that were natives that were planted right next to it that could eventually grow up and replace it for shade. They were dependent on this tree for shade for their home, but they didn't have a replacement, even though there were two native trees that could grow up. I don't know that they'll ever actually swap out until they get rid of that eucalyptus, because the eucalyptus is really going to hog that water and it's going to stunt the growth of those other trees. Now, let's talk about the other problem with eucalyptus. And this is not to bag on any one particular tree, but more to make you aware to research the types of trees that you put in. The eucalyptus, in my hometown of Santa Barbara, California, there was a fire that went through, I want to say it was late 80s or early 90s. And one of the problems is there's oil in there. There's a eucalyptus oil, and they just become like these bombs. So they would heat up and then they would explode and they would spread the fire essentially. And so it just swept through this whole ravine area. And there was a lot of homes that were damaged and burned down. And thankfully I had some family there and their house was saved. It just happened to be one of the homes that the firefighters were able to get to in a very dangerous area. But that's one of the properties that you should look at and when you're choosing trees. And I'm not trying to dissuade you from eucalyptus at all, but I just want you to make sure you, like I said, you educate yourself. So that was site 2. Now site 3 that I saw was actually a friend's house. She's got a horse property. She takes care of horses for other people. Beautiful place. But she's in the desert and she needs some shade. So what we'll have to do there is kind of like what we did in the first one, where they had a problem with erosion and kind of a flooding situation. She'll have a situation where she's going to need to catch that water in a basin to help water these trees, because she doesn't really need additional work to have to be babying trees. I don't think anybody wants that. And then the other thing that comes with it is the cost of the water, which in various places is either more expensive or some people don't really want more water. So you might be on the East Coast or the northeast of the US where they're getting tons and tons of water and trying to get rid of it. So building a basin really isn't the right idea for that. But in this situation, that's what was necessary. She'll be able to water it to get it established for the first year or two, because they do have some lines already kind of out in that area. And we might put more than one. I keep saying it like there's only going to be one. But ideally, depending on how much area she's trying to shade, we would be able to create basins that will also be able to support a few plants to provide some shade for the roots. And then those basins will help catch natural rainfall. And because we'll put natives in there, they'll already be adapted to whatever the rainfall situation is. So they'll be more of a long-term, sustainable, low-maintenance solution, which, as you know, I love, because I think it's just better. We're all busy. So the less we have to really put into some of this foundational landscape is more of what I would call it, like your base structural landscape, the better, because that's what you want to last and live out its life the best it can. Okay, so now I want to talk about trees. So I looked up, and I'm gonna try to pull them up here, the different trees for the different regions of the U.S. And I'm sorry if you're watching this and you're not from the U.S., but this is what I know. If you want some help, please comment below where you're at, and I'd be happy to take a look. But for the most part, these are like the standard trees we see in the U.S., the beeches, the maples, the oaks. Those are pretty standard across. And I just, a caveat, these are the top shade trees that are native in your areas. Okay, this isn't just any old trees, because there's some that grow really, really well, and I've talked about this in some of my other videos, but they're not necessarily native, which means even though they can do well, they don't necessarily do well for the whole ecosystem. So let me give some examples. So, okay, so there's different species of mesquite trees, and one of the ones that was recommended to me, I believe it was Brazilian, Brazilian, I could be wrong, but essentially I was told, oh, this is a way better species or variety of mesquite. It just grows faster, it does all this stuff. Well, it also has roots that will spread out and kind of go wild a little bit, and it's not what I would particularly want in my yard. I want a mesquite tree, although now that I've gone through this rain harvesting class and I know how to do a water budget, I don't know that I want that. I'll do a whole video on that. But again, it kind of comes back to do your research. What are the roots like? Is it a tree that can propagate without anything? I love birch trees, but I had a birch tree at a house I had in Montana. And I kept finding like the baby birch trees because they just kind of clone and spread out, and you find them sprouting up all over the yard. I didn't want that many birch trees. So in the Northeast, there's the American beech, the North red oak, and the red maple, as opposed to the Southeast, which is another oak, but it's the live oak, which I believe also grow in California. I've seen them out there. But a bald cypress and a southern magnolia, which I think is pretty iconic for the South, is the magnolia trees. I actually think they're really beautiful. I've had them in a few yards, and aside from being a little bit messy, I've heard people complain they're messy. I just love them. I think they're gorgeous. So the Midwest has the sugar maple, the swamp white oak, and then the American basswood. Now, I've also heard of like the chestnut tree and what's the other one? Oh, hopefully it comes back to my mind. But there's another tree that also has some fruiting that it does, which I love things that do multiple. Like if it provides shade and food and a nitrogen fixer, which is what the mesquite does, then to me that's like bonus, right? Triple bonus right there. In the Southwest, which is where I'm at, there's the desert willow, which I was really wanting a willow tree, and the willows just don't survive down here. Willows love water. So if you've got a water problem, plant a willow. They love it. Anyways, I have a desert willow, which is not a true willow. The velvet mesquite, which is the native mesquite, and that one doesn't have the roots that go crazy. And then Arizona sycamore, which is what I was just telling you, don't plant. But, if you've got the room and you can keep it away, far enough away from your house that it can't damage anything or anyone, maybe have a go of it. It's up to you. Then there's the Pacific Northwest, where they have a big leaf maple, an Oregon white oak. Like I said, oaks are everywhere. And the vine maple. Now, I don't know about the vine maple. It's a multi-stemmed tree. I don't know. Do your research. The Oregon white oak does say that it's slow growing. And then the big leaf maple is the largest native maple in the West. So massive leaves. So it's got a dense canopy. So make sure this is going somewhere where you really don't care if anything is growing underneath it. Don't plant this where you think, oh, it's just going to shade some of my plants. That's not a good idea. And that was why I had been recommended a different version of the mesquite tree, although I don't really see mesquites as really having a heavy canopy by any means, but they were saying, oh, that will still let light through and it sounds all great. And no. Okay, so for the Western Mountains, this is the only other one I've got for right now. The quaking aspen, the Rocky Mountain juniper, and the ponderosa pine. Those are the ones that are coming up in the search that I've done. Some of these are evergreen, some of them are not. The aspen, again, is clonal, so you will get little aspens popping up everywhere. You know, if you've got the space and you love aspen and you want something to fill in, that's perfect. I love aspen, and if I had the property there that I could do it on, I would have definitely let them grow wild, but where I had the aspen was right in front of my house in a little corner, and I forgot what the other tree was that was right next to it. It was not a place that I could just let it go crazy, and I didn't want it all over my front yard. I had kids playing there at the time. My kids and the neighborhood kids would run through, and they loved to climb up this other tree that was in my front yard that I have no idea what that was. So very sad that I never took the time to actually figure out what kind of tree it was. But those are some ideas for you for native trees that could possibly help you out with getting shade. Now, I tried to give you some tips in there if you're having a problem with water and you don't want to do basins because you're not trying to capture water. You know, the alternative is a basin that's tall enough that can keep the water out. That's an idea. But I also want to talk about where to place your trees. Some trees, and this is the other bonus, like I love like additional things that trees can do. The mesquite tree, I found out, this velvet one, will actually size to the amount of water that it's able to get in its habitat. So if I can't give it tons of water, it won't grow as big, because it's only going to grow as big as, you know, its amount of water that it's getting. I mean, there's not many things right now that are kind of staying in their bounds. So I love that about that tree. I already talked about the length of the shade, but then the other thing that I keep coming back to in different settings is where you're watering. So when you're trying to establish a tree, you're really trying to water right there because it's a little baby, right? And then it grows up. And as it's growing up, you want to like not have the roots just kind of clumped right there and not really going anywhere. You want them to spread out, and you want to direct them to where you want them to go. So which is away from paved areas or away from, you know, your house foundation. So you're going to water farther and farther out. You want to keep moving that watering out so that it's going towards, the roots are going towards the resources. It's the same thing with when you're applying any kind of fertilizing or anything like that. You're going to apply those nutrients farther and farther out, and like you can do concentric circles or however you want to do it, but it's going to, they're going to send roots out, and it's not going to be like a short 6-foot distance or a 10-foot distance. These trees are sending roots way out to find nutrients, and you've got to train them to get outside of their initial planting area. Especially because this is the first time I had heard the term this week. It was this past weekend, and they were talking about plants that had lazy roots. I had no idea that was a thing. I've been around trees my whole life, different kinds, orchards. I'd never heard of trees that had lazy roots. Have you ever heard of that? I'd love to hear about it if you have trees that have lazy roots. But I mean, it makes sense, right? If you're just watering or feeding right in this one little area, then okay, why would it go further? Anyways, this is the first video I'm going to do about this. I also want to talk about what to plant underneath the shade, and then how to kind of figure out, okay, you have your trees out here, and here, maybe your house is over here. So you've done your measurement and you've said, okay, this tree is going to get 20 feet tall, and I've done my 30 feet away, or maybe not. Maybe it's closer so that you can use that shade for when it's sunny. But what you want to be able to do is have the shade in the summer, in the times where you need it to help cool your house, but then not have it shade when you have the sun lower in the sky. So if it's, you know, if here's where the sun is in the summer and then it comes lower in the sky during the winter, you want that to be able to pierce through. And even some trees are so thick that even when they've dropped all their leaves, if they're not an evergreen, you still aren't going to get as much sunlight. So plants. Next time we're going to talk about plants and what you plants in the shade, perennials that can grow in the shade, and hopefully I'll have another list for you to give you some ideas to get you started. All right, have a great one.